Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Art Chadwick. Q&A with our live audience and host, Anil Kanda. Today's episode, are dinosaurs in the Bible? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
Well, dinosaurs are not just part of our past. They're everywhere today, from children's books to museums. They even roam the frozen food aisles in chicken nugget form. Despite disappearing eons ago, these giants continue to capture our imagination. But what do we really know about them? Here to discuss dinosaurs with me is a research professor of biology and geology. Until recently, he served as the director of the Dinosaur Science Museum and Research Center at Southwestern Adventist University. And he directed a study at one of the largest dinosaur bone beds in the world. He's not just an expert at speed dating. He's someone who knows his stuff. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Art Chadwick. Dr. Chadwick, we're glad you're here.
It's great to be here. I'm glad we can do this.
Now, this may be a basic question, but it's really foundational to this discussion. What exactly are dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs are animals, they're extinct, and they have an open acetabulum, which means that their hip is not socketed.
Wow, so that's the definition of a dinosaur?
That's my working definition, yes.
Much of what people know comes from the movie Jurassic Park. Is that what dinosaurs all look like?
Well, that's what some dinosaurs look like, yes.
Sometimes when we think of the word dinosaurs, that's what comes to mind, the Tyrannosaurus Rex breaking out of Jurassic Park, or the raptors hunting down small children like in the movie. But there's a lot of dinosaurs, aren't there?
There are, and there are many different dinosaurs. So there are many different sizes, both plant-eating and carnivorous dinosaurs.
I guess the one that people are most used to are the ones that are huge and vicious and trying to eat people.
Yeah, T-Rex.
We have here some wonderful fossils. Could you tell us a little bit about them? Let's start with this one. What exactly is this?
That is a tooth from Tyrannosaurus Rex.
This is a tooth?
Yeah.
Now, how big was the Tyrannosaurus Rex before he had dental surgery?
That is a big animal, and those teeth are bigger than his brain.
Whoa, that's really incredible. I thought this was like a raptor toe. Now, what exactly is this?
That's a scapula from a small duck-billed dinosaur.
You said small duck-billed dinosaur? Yeah. Now, how big do duck-billed dinosaurs get?
30 to 40 feet long.
30 to 40 feet? Oh,
yeah.
Wow. How about this one right here? This one looks really interesting.
That is a chevron, which is a bone that hangs below the tail of dinosaurs and other reptiles, and that's where the plumbing went.
Now, am I holding it right? Is it this way or this way?
No, the other way.
This way?
Upside down.
So the plumbing goes through here, huh?
Right.
Okay, interesting.
It's actually two fused ribs.
Whoa.
Because they have a set of ribs on every vertebra all the way back, and in the tail, they're fused together to make this chevron.
Okay. Now, how about this?
That is a toe from a duck-billed dinosaur.
This is a toenail.
Yeah.
Like a toenail, huh?
Well, they would have been covered with a bony plate of some sort, so yeah, it would be like a toenail.
Looks like a bad case of toe fungus. Now, how about this one right here?
That's a tail vertebra from a duck-billed dinosaur also.
Okay, interesting. Wow, this is really fascinating. How did you get involved in the study of dinosaurs?
It's a strange story. I really was not that interested in dinosaurs. And I was working on fossil whales down in Peru, studying these fossil whales, doing what we call taphonomy. Taphonomy is the science of everything that happens to an animal from the time it's alive until you dig it up. So it concerns what the animal was doing when it died, how it died, what happened after it died, and then what happened to the bones. We were doing taphonomy on fossil whales, and we are now doing taphonomy on fossil dinosaurs.
What were you hoping to learn?
The history of these animals that no longer exist. Because they're no longer here, we can't just go out and look. So we have to reconstruct it from the remnants that we dig up out of the ground.
Typically, when you guys are digging up dinosaur bones, and I know there may not be an average, but what percentage of their bones are found in these fossil records?
Well, of these dinosaurs, we're finding all their bones. We have probably on our site, we probably have close to 10,000 animals, 30 to 40 foot long. Mostly duck-billed dinosaurs. We also are finding Triceratops, and of course remnants of T-Rex and other animals as well.
From the fossil record, what are you able to understand about their lives?
That they died catastrophically, that they died en masse. Probably we think after they died, they bloated and floated and got stranded on a shoreline somewhere where they rotted for a while so that the bones could come apart. And then the whole mass of bones on the shoreline was redeposited out into deeper water, probably by an earthquake or some tectonic event that stirred up the sediment enough for water to get back in, and then it became a fluid and traveled out into deeper water.
Now you're talking about waters here. Are you referring to the biblical story of the flood?
Off record, yes.
Okay. Now, how was the biblical story of flood, how is that connected to dinosaurs?
Well, we think probably the dinosaurs died during the flood, that they were killed by this catastrophic alteration of the surface of the earth. And so many of these animals perished together.
Now, have you and your team discovered better ways of doing science on dinosaurs?
We have. The day that I took over this project and began to work on it, the scientist that had been there before, who was a secular scientist, claimed that that was the last day science would be done on the Hansen Ranch, because he knew I was a believer in the biblical account of origins. So I knew that I was under the gun, and I knew I wasn't up to it, so I prayed about it and asked God for wisdom, and He has poured it out on us. We have developed techniques that are better than any other techniques used for studying dinosaurs. Our website has been proclaimed by other scientists to be the best in the world for dinosaur bones. And that's all a result of these new techniques we developed.
Oh, that's incredible. What kind of techniques are these?
Well, first off, it was about the time that GPS was becoming popular, and we found out that there are survey-grade GPS equipment that allows you to get centimeter or less accuracy. So we thought, well, why don't we use this to map the bones? Because at that time, what you did, if you found a bone in the ground, you had to uncover it, then bring in a grid, a string grid, align it with a grid across the quarry, and then draw the bone in that string grid. And that was very laborious and not very efficient, and also a lot of data seemed to be lost. So we thought, well, if we do this, we'll not only get away from all that difficult procedure, but we'll have data that we can use on the computer. So we got this equipment, which is a high resolution GPS, survey grade GPS, and we brought it in, and we had to set up a base station. At the base station is on a given locality, and that locality knows where it is. So the GPS asks the satellites, where am I? And it says, well, you're over here a meter. And then it just brings that back to where it actually is. And then it sends that correction over the radio. The receiver at the other end is called the rover. And the rover receives that signal from the base, and it takes a point and then makes that same correction. Those are 10 points inside a 1 centimeter square, about 1/4 of an inch. And that shows you that it's plenty accurate for mapping bones. This is after you discover the bone.
Okay.
This is how you map the bone so that you can preserve the information about where it was.
Okay, interesting. Now, why would you want to preserve the information where it was? Is this to add to the science of understanding their lifestyle, the concentration of these animals in the area?
These bones got here somehow.
Right.
What brought them there? And so we take these points on the bones. We can tell whether they're oriented in certain ways, how deep they are in the ground, what the bone shape is and so on. All that information is preserved by using this GPS technique. So we get a set of points on the bone, and then we take a picture of the bone in the ground, and then we extract the background from that picture and orient that to the points in the computer. And now we have a permanent location for that bone in 3 space. So we can bring in then other bones around it, and we can show what its relationship to those bones is.
Wow, this is really fascinating, because by this information, by this data, and how you're able to map this out, you're understanding something more of the herd mentality of these dinosaurs. You're able to tell something more about their lifestyles and the way they operated together socially. What were some fascinating discoveries in regards to this study?
Well, we were able to show that the dinosaurs, apparently a large number of them were all killed at once, which, as you say, suggests that there was some kind of herd mentality and that these animals stayed together. These animals included no young ones. They're all adults or upper stage juveniles. And so you have a herd of adults with no little ones. That's unique. So it begs the question, where are all the young ones? And then the fact that they were all killed together and that they rotted and disaggregated, and then they were finally buried. All of that story came out of the fact that we had oriented this data in the GPS.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, here you can see how the quarry actually looks with all the bones in place. Those little red dots are 1 meter, so those bones are really big.
How big is that area?
That's 30 meters across, probably.
30 meters?
That'd be 100 feet.
Okay.
So it's a pretty big area.
How many people were involved in this study, the one that you led?
Well, you're seeing right there the results of 26 years of excavation on this one quarry. Of course, we have many other quarries as well, so this is just one story.
That's incredible. What other kinds of dinosaurs did you find in Wyoming?
Well, we have a lot of duck-billed dinosaurs. We have lots of triceratops. And then we have a smattering of the carnivorous dinosaurs, T-Rexes, Nanotyrannus. We have Pachycephalosaurus. We have the raptors that are made famous by Jurassic Park.
Now, which one were the bald ones that butt heads?
Those are Pachycephalosaurus.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, we have some of those. We have Nodosaurus, which are big lumbering creatures that look like a tank. They're actually quite like an armadillo, except many 10 times, 20 times bigger.
In this study, what was the most complete dinosaur animal that you found?
We found some Triceratops, which are very interesting animals. They have this huge head that weighs about 1,000 pounds. And we find the disarticulated but associated remains of these animals, which means they probably floated around in a sack of skin until they were stranded on a shoreline somewhere, and that's where we have dug them up.
Now, can anyone go to these digs? Do you have to be a research scientist, or how does that work?
We have people from all over the world that come every year. We have as many as 200 participants a year. We have built just recently a very nice facility that can accommodate 200 people, feed them and take care of their needs, and it's beautiful.
What's the day-to-day life of someone who is part of this project? I mean, are they just digging in the ground until, because every time, you've seen pictures, you see people finding something and they're just brushing off the dirt. Is that what it's all about?
Now, those are stage pictures. We dig with dental tools, though, mostly. And we've removed many, many cubic meters of dirt with dental tools.
Dental tools?
Yeah, because you don't want to break the bone. And so you go down very slowly and carefully until you hit the bones, and then you expose them, and then we do the mapping.
What's the most incredible find you've come across?
I think the one site we have that has the remains of a Triceratops, has the remains of a duck-billed dinosaur, has the remains of Anzu, which is the oviraptor, and also a little dinosaur named Thescelosaurus, which is a sheep-sized dinosaur. All four of these just in an area the size of this stage, or a little bit bigger.
Where do you take all these bones?
They all go back to Texas, to Southwestern Adventist University, where we have a large museum, and we have a repository where we store 40,000 bones.
In this museum, what's the most complete fossil?
Well, we have a Nanotyrannus. We found the second Nanotyrannus.
Nanotyrannus.
Yeah, nano means tiny.
Right.
It's about half the size of a regular T-Rex.
Now, what would be that number of how big a Nanotyrannosaurus is?
Maybe 15 feet, 20 feet long.
Wow. And then a full-grown Tyrannosaurus Rex would be 30 feet?
Yeah, but these are not. These are different species.
Okay.
Although that point has been widely debated.
Okay.
I'm quite sure it's a different species.
Wow, that's really fascinating. As you're just digging around in these sites, you're learning a lot about history.
Absolutely.
Does it deepen your faith? Does it confirm your faith more?
It does. I mean, these are wonderful animals. I've fallen in love with dinosaurs, and they were big.
Right.
And they were a dominant fauna, sorry.
Well, this is really exciting. I know we're going to get into some interesting topics really soon. This has been a Dynamite conversation with Dr. Art Chadwick about his study of dinosaurs. When we return, we'll explore how we can apply his understanding of dinosaurs to make them more applicable for today. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been having a rawsome conversation with Dr. Art Chadwick, who until recently served as the director of the Dinosaur Science Museum and Research Center at Southwestern Adventist University. Dr. Chadwick, I got to ask you this question. Why are dinosaurs no longer present in today's world?
They're extinct. We think they probably died out at the time of the flood, perhaps because God gave consideration to man and said, these guys will kill the humans. Humans are cut down to 8 individuals. These dinosaurs can produce 25 offspring in a single nesting season, which may have been 2 or more per year. So you can imagine that T-Rex could be running all over the earth, killing everything. And I think God just gave consideration to man and said, okay, let's save these for later on.
You know, I've encountered people who have said, look, the Bible doesn't talk about dinosaurs. It doesn't mention the word dinosaur. What would you say in response to that?
I would say, yes, that's true. Dinosaur was invented in the 1700s, late 1700s, by a creationist, actually. But there is this creature that you read about in Job chapter 40 called Behemoth. The characteristics of Behemoth were it had its strength in its hips and walked on 2 legs. It had a tail like a cedar tree. It ate grass like an ox, which is what these animals eat. It lived in the fens. It's just a perfect candidate for a dinosaur.
What kind of dinosaur?
Nothing else. A duck-billed dinosaur.
Oh, really?
Yeah, lived in everything that has a duckbill that we know about lives in water. So these probably lived in the swamps or wet areas and ate vegetation out of the swamp.
We just talked about a flood and that wiped out these dinosaurs. Are you telling us that some of these survived after the flood, or what was that? The book of Job was written before the flood?
Well, Job was written probably when the descendants of Noah were still alive on the earth. Maybe Noah himself was still alive. And so I'm sure, just like today, nobody in this room has seen a dragon, but I'll bet if I gave you a paper and pencil, every one of you could draw a dragon. I think it was the same with dinosaurs. They were so spectacular that their memory was perpetuated by those that survived the flood.
You know, in regards to paleontology, and you had mentioned before that when you look at dinosaurs, they look like they were destroyed immediately and through some kind of catastrophe. What other evidences do you see in the fossil record that confirm this biblical flood story in regards to fossils?
The intricate details in some fossils that we find that show the internal structures of the animals still preserved, that would require burial on a scale like nothing we're familiar with, fortunately, today. There must have been catastrophes that buried these animals so fast that they didn't have time to decay. I think also that bacteria are prevented from growing if there's enough pressure on the fossils, so enough overburden so that the bacteria couldn't destroy the internal structures of these animals. Now, it's not true of all animals, but in the spectacularly preserved fossils, we find that internal structures very, very well preserved.
That's really interesting. And it sounds like as you're sharing this, what's going through my mind is that when this flood happened, there was this state of activity, this agitation, but the preservation took place there as well. Rapid burial.
Right, it must have.
That's really fascinating.
Today we put an animal out, and before very long it's decayed and gone.
I know there have been some interesting finds, some discoveries in the last 20, 30 years of tissue finds in the fossil record. Everything from osteocytes to, you know, some kind of proteins that apparently, with fossils that should have been millions upon millions of years ago, there's still these kinds of tissues that are still in existing that tends to challenge the traditional evolutionary theory out there. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a serious challenge because the laws that govern the breakdown of molecules are well understood. And studies have been done on how long a protein lasts, how long DNA can last, how long these various molecules that are inside our bodies can last after we die. We know from mummies and things like that that thousands of years don't necessarily destroy these things. But we know that tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years will destroy all of it. So there should not be any protein, there should not be any DNA, there should not be any of these preserved molecules in these fossils. And yet, we're finding it all the time. We took in the dinosaurs, the tendons are bony. They aren't like our tendons, they're flexible. They are actually ossified, so they're made into bone. We took one of these tendons and soaked it in a solution that dissolved the bone, and there was a gelatin-like material left behind, which I think if we had tested it would have proved to be collagen, the same protein that's in the bones. That should not be there. And we're finding this more and more. The more we look, the more we find evidences that suggest that things are preserved long after they should have been gone.
That's really interesting, and that really speaks to the biblical model as the catastrophe that wiped out dinosaurs being much sooner than millions and millions of years ago. At least it contributes to that understanding.
Yes.
Now, what is the kickback you might receive from other scientists when you begin to share these kinds of things?
Well, on that particular one, it's really interesting because scientists have argued with each other. A group of scientists says there's no way you're getting protein out of these bones because they're so old. And another group of scientists says, yes, but we got it. So they have tried to think of ways they could preserve it. And one of the suggestions was that iron might protect the proteins and keep them, or the DNA, and keep it longer. But that's not usually what iron does. And I don't think those studies have ever been done. It's just a suggestion. And I think the more we look at it, the more difficult, more challenging it becomes. But by and large, scientists have accepted the idea that these things can last for millions of years, even though in the face of the evidence that can't happen.
That's really interesting that you bring this out. I actually looked at Mary Schweitzer's paper on what she believes is the preservation mechanism behind these tissues, and she does point out iron. but it's asserted, it's not actually demonstrated. And then other scientists simply accept this as fact. Oh, we've now taken care of this dilemma, no issue, we've solved the problem here. But the reality is, it doesn't meet up.
No.
It doesn't match it doesn't deal with the problem itself.
No, it doesn't explain why proteins can be found in bones that don't have any iron in them.
Yeah, and we're talking, the theory holds that these bones are supposed to be millions of years ago. 100
million years.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that history is correcting itself.
Yeah.
Really remarkable. In regards to Noah's flood and the dinosaurs, you know, there are some even groups out there, whether they're Christian or what, saying dinosaurs didn't exist. That was all made up. What would you say to them?
That's sad. I had a student one time came to me and said she didn't want to work in the dinosaur lab because she didn't believe dinosaurs were, she wasn't sure she should believe that dinosaurs were real. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, our teacher made us look the other way when we went by the dinosaur in the museum. So she had had this kind of experience, and that is so sad because reality is there. I had another scientist with a PhD in biology who came to the dig from overseas, and after one day of excavation, he was calling back to his colleagues in his home country and telling them that dinosaurs were real. That was a revelation.
I can just imagine. You will not believe what I just found out. Dinosaurs are real.
Yeah, I think that's a sad mistake that we don't recognize them.
The discovery of dinosaur fossils, does that contradict the biblical story in any way?
Not that I can think of. It's what you would expect to see.
Yeah, in fact, it actually confirms the biblical story, right?
It does.
The biblical story tells us there was a global flood that wiped out a lot of life, and so we would expect to find this in the ground.
And no matter what model you look at it from, it's catastrophic. So the conventional scientists have to have a catastrophe to wipe out the dinosaurs. We have a catastrophe that wipes out the dinosaurs. So yes, it's good evidence of a global catastrophe.
Now, based upon your study of dinosaurs and the Bible in addition to that, did God create freaky-looking Tyrannosaurus Rex in the Garden of Eden?
Well, you know, that's a good question because we don't really know what kinds of changes could have been necessary as a result of sin. Certainly the big giant long-necked dinosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, those all look like they had an amazing God behind them. And
they're herbivores too, right?
Yeah, and in Job you read that these are the first of the creation of God. If that's what Behemoth is, then he's pretty proud of his work. Of course, the carnivorous dinosaurs, like lions and tigers, probably had to modify in order to survive sin, and I think God accommodated that.
There was adaptation that took place.
Exactly.
You know, the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 6, in the description of this global flood, there was violence everywhere. Was that just with humans, or did that permeate animal life as well?
I think it affected all of creation. There are some strange-looking creatures out there that are not alive today. Not dinosaurs.
Really interesting, huh? Yeah, it's fascinating when you take a good look at history and what the fossil record is showing. You know, there are lots of models out there of when dinosaurs existed, and there's particular stages from, you know, Cretaceous to Jurassic era. I'm not going in order, by the way. Then there's the Ice Age. As far as you can tell, how do you take a good look at these timelines in comparison with the scriptural record?
I think what we're seeing in the fossil record, the layers of rock with the fossils in them, is a successive burial of habitats. So in the bottom we find things that live in the bottom of the ocean. And then as we go up, we begin to encounter landforms, and then finally we get out into land. And I think there is, in general, a relationship between the kinds of fossils we find and the kind of environment that was on the pre-flood Earth. So we try to reconstruct that environment from what we have found. It's very difficult because we have no vision for what it could have been. How can you have a world where there's no death? That's a serious challenge. But I suspect if you'd ask Adam that, before the fall, he would have said, well, how can you have a world with death? And so it's just a matter of what your worldview is, what you can see and what you can allow.
Based upon the biblical model, when did the Ice Age take place?
After the flood, there was a lot of catastrophic volcanic activity that would have filled the air with ash and would have occluded sunlight and caused the cooling of the earth, and that would have caused ice to form. So I think that may have been what happened. In order to get the waters off the earth, God gathered them up into the polar regions. I'm trying to reconstruct what it was like before the flood, and I find out that probably these dinosaurs didn't live where man lives. Maybe because the climate was more equitable where man was, and it was warmer where these dinosaurs are. If you weighed 100 tons and you got cold at night, you would never get warm again. So they must have lived in an area that was warmer and probably at a lower elevation than where humans and the mammals were. Whereas mammals, they can get along fine in a wide variety of temperatures. Dinosaurs would have had to stay pretty warm. And I think that's probably an indication of why we find them segregated, why they're all dead and the mammals are not. So that plus the ark, living in the ark.
Well, that's really interesting, because what you're telling us is sort of an explanation why we shouldn't expect always to find human footprints next to dinosaur footprints, because they would have been separated. I mean, that's what happens in our world today. You know, humans generally aren't around where lines are hanging out, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's really interesting. What do you think about some of these so-called evidences where someone says, oh, I found a human footprint next to this dinosaur footprint? Is it just bogus? Is it a hoax? What do you think those things are?
But when we first started out in this business of looking at origins, our goal was, we had just all three of us, myself, Leonard Brand, and Bernie Neufeld, had all gotten our PhDs within the last year or two. And we decided, let's go out and let's solve this creation thing and then go back to doing molecular biology. And what happened was we looked very carefully at all the evidences, including these foot tracks. I wrote some papers on that, and we showed that the ones that they were using for evidence weren't human tracks. They were carved, or they were the tracks of three-toed dinosaurs that looked like elongate tracks. And then we looked at other evidences, and every one of them, it turned out to be not appropriate. So Christians were using evidences to support a true story that were false evidences, and that really hit us hard. So we decided we had to go back and do geology and get trained in geology.
Do some solid science.
Yeah, do some real science.
Well, appreciate your contribution to this. I think it's really enlightening and teaching us dinosaurs aren't things we need to be afraid of, unless they're standing right before us, right?
That's right.
Anything else you'd like to add about dinosaurs? I would love to say about dinosaurs in regards to, what you've discovered.
Well, we have an opportunity for anybody that would like to come to the field to work with us to dig up these dinosaur bones, to help us dig these up by themselves. And that's a really rewarding experience. I like to think about the fact that this bone that I just dug out of the ground was walking around in one of these amazing creatures, and here I've got it in my hand. That's an astonishing feeling.
How long are you at these dinosaur digs? What's typical for a volunteer?
We're there for a month of June every year in the field in Wyoming, and it's you can stay for a day, a week, or the whole month, but it's something you can learn about if you go to go to dinosaur.swa.edu.
That's really exciting.
We welcome anybody that would like to be involved in this project.
Wonderful. Appreciate the invitation to that. I know that our studio audience has questions for Dr. Chadwick, but before we get to that, I want to invite you to visit our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight, where you can view previous episodes and also download a free gift. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been talking about dinosaurs with Dr. Art Chadwick, but now we're going to give our studio audience the chance to ask their questions. Who would like to start us off? Right over there.
What is the approximate cash value of the T-Rex tooth on the table?
What is the value of that? Well, number one, that is a very expensive cast. It's not the original tooth. A tooth that is only the top part of that sold at auction in Britain for $33,000. So I would be foolish to bring one of those on a trip.
$33,000 for just this part?
Just that part, yeah.
Oh.
So they are very expensive. That's, of course, the most expensive part of the body. So it's other dinosaur bones are not worth that much.
How much do you think a skull of a T-Rex is worth?
A real one, $15 million maybe.
Well, I know what I need to find now to get rich, so. Any other questions? Right over there.
Do you believe that birds are related to dinosaurs?
There are similarities between chickens and dinosaurs. We are quite certain that dinosaurs, at least some of them, had feathers. And we know that chickens have scales on their legs, which is what dinosaurs' bodies covered with. That doesn't mean they're related in terms of their evolution. It just means that they had similarities between them, just like mammals and birds share certain features. But the bigger question is, did dinosaurs come from birds or birds come from dinosaurs? And the answer to that is some people think so, but we find some claims of birds back before the dinosaurs, at least as far back as the Triassic. And so it doesn't seem reasonable to say that birds came from dinosaurs because we have mammals then, and you don't say mammals came from dinosaurs. So that's a question that's highly debated. But there are similarities that can't be denied between birds and dinosaurs.
You know, in regards to dinosaurs that had feathers on it, what are some misconceptions of dinosaurs in maybe movie and television that we realize now, hey, look, it looked different. It looks actually different than the way it's portrayed?
Well, I think a lot of dinosaurs' feathers have been added where we may not have the evidence, direct evidence for feathers. And that's because it's a popular idea. And a lot of the market for dinosaurs is driven by kids. And almost all the books that are written, if you want to write a book about dinosaurs to be successful, it has to be aimed at that audience. So there's this idea of still having dinosaurs around today that persists. And so some scientists have said, well, if we can point them to birds, they're still here today. But I don't think most kids would think that having a parakeet and having a T-Rex would be in the same ballpark.
They sometimes act like each other, though.
Yeah, they do.
Any other questions? Right over there.
Doctor, you mentioned that fossils and dinosaur bones have been found in various places due to them being washed ashore. How do you know which ones belong together and with which dinosaurs?
That's a question I get asked a lot. It's a good question. One I wondered myself before I got into dinosaurs. It's largely experience. You've seen a lot of bones. You know which bones go with which dinosaurs. I'm sure my first day on the job working with dinosaurs, I didn't have a clue. But after having seen so many bones, recognizing which bones go with which dinosaur, I can tell you absolutely that this scapula here is from a duck-billed dinosaur. And the reason I know that is because I know that shape very well. So that's kind of the way it goes. As to whether they belong to the identical same dinosaur or not, that's a little more difficult. If you find them in close approximation, I think you can assert that they came from the same dinosaur. But if I find one here and one over there, I wouldn't have any way of knowing.
Now, isn't it true, though, at least as paleontology was developing as a scientist, there were a number of reconstructions of dinosaur fossils that were fabricated.
Well, they were put in the wrong, bones were put in the wrong places. One of them had a head where the tail was supposed to be, and another one they put the wrong head on for many years, and finally they corrected that, just because it seemed like that head should go there, but they didn't find it in the same place. So sometimes these errors are made, and of course paleontologists want to correct it before anybody discovers it.
Yeah, I can imagine the challenge of paleontologists trying to piece together things. That must be really challenging. At least it used to be.
No, it still is, yeah.
Wow. Any other questions?
Some scientists are working on bringing the woolly mammoth back to life. Is there any discussion about bringing herbivorous dinosaurs back? And would the lower oxygen levels on Earth now prevent their revival?
Yes, of course. Every scientist wants to bring back a T-Rex, not a herbivorous dinosaur. They would want to get a T-Rex.
And we haven't learned from movies, apparently.
No, we haven't learned anything. But yeah, that idea persists, although if a dinosaur is really from 65 million years ago, there's absolutely zero probability that you could ever bring it back. If they are a few thousand years ago, then it is within the realm of possibility. And with the woolly mammoth, they are trying to do that right now. Whether they'll be successful or not, I don't know. But that is one of the goals. As far as oxygen is concerned, some people have hypothesized that there was a higher level of oxygen in the pre-flood world. That's a very difficult assertion to make, because as soon as you go over 20% oxygen, the atmosphere becomes capable of inferno. So anything that is in that atmosphere will instantly burst into flame. Not instantly, but will burst into flame if it's ignited. And the whole world would just burn down. And then the oxygen level would go back down. So I don't think that idea has a lot of credibility, although it could be a little higher. I don't think it would be a whole lot higher.
Interesting. Any other questions?
Hi, Doctor. So we learned in school, for the most part, that dinosaurs existed like 65 plus million years ago. And growing up, I never thought there was any debate. But hearing you now, it kind of brings into question, it sounds like you believe that dinosaurs were around maybe 6,000 years ago. Do you think that there's a chance that dinosaurs and humans coexisted at the same time on this earth?
Yes, in my model they did, because God made the dinosaurs on same day as humans probably, and so they would have been on the earth. I don't think that man hung around where the dinosaurs were, probably, especially after the big theropods developed. But I also think that man would have been able to, if man were larger than he is today, I think man would have been able to handle these dinosaurs.
Interesting. Any other questions? Right over there.
Hi. We know that crocodiles are descendants of Dinosuchus, and they have survived the extinction. So how did they survive until today while the other dinosaur species and large marine life did not?
That's absolutely the $64,000 question, is how can you have a Earth in which a whole population of giant plant-eating dinosaurs, giant flesh-eating dinosaurs, medium-sized plant-eating dinosaurs, medium-sized flesh-eating dinosaurs, and small plant-eating dinosaurs and small flesh-eating dinosaurs. How could you have this whole population with all the variety and diversity that we know dinosaurs had, all be extinguished and not destroy the mammals, not destroy the birds, not destroy the plants, and all these other things, but all the dinosaurs are gone? That is a really, really big question. And I think though, if you know anything about alligators, they seem to be able to survive just about anything. They're very hardy species. So I can imagine them being able to survive some conditions that other animals couldn't. But that still begs the question of why all these different forms of dinosaurs all died out at the same time.
Right, and based upon at least what we're hearing and what the Bible is teaching, the Bible talks about this global flood that wiped out animals, many kinds of animals. Noah took some animals with him, and apparently some, water-based animals survived. But it makes sense that some of these animals also probably became extinct after the flood over a period of time. And we have animal species today that go extinct.
Sure.
So it's really interesting. Any other questions?
How was Noah not eaten by the dinosaurs that were on the ark?
That'd be a good argument for not taking them on the ark. Yeah, I don't know. That year spent in that close quarters with all those animals, all that smell, all that noise, and even all of his own relatives must have been a trying time for Noah.
Yeah, and as far as we can tell, what kind of animals did Noah bring onto the ark?
Well, he didn't bring any, but God sent these animals to the ark, which is an amazing thing in itself. They may not have included dinosaurs. So that's one idea that I floated, and I think that God could have said, okay, we're gonna protect man, we're not gonna bring these through the flood. But it seems like he could have brought some through.
Right, or at least animals that became extinct over
Yeah.
time, right? Any other questions?
Hello again. How did paleontologists and scientists determine the 5 global cataclysmic extinction events? Was it based on hypotheses, or are there evidence that support that?
There is really good evidence for a mass extinction at the Triassic Permian boundary, between the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic, because almost all the animals that you find below that boundary, the species level, went extinct. Now the forms may have still survived, but at the species level there was a mass extinction right there. Same thing is true at the Cretaceous, where a lot of forms such as dinosaurs and ammonites and some plants didn't get through that boundary, but lots of them did. So all of these boundaries are delimited by fossils. And once they found those two, then just based on the data, then they begin looking at the whole fossil record to see if there was evidence for other mass extinctions. And they found a few other peaks, but those two are the major ones. And that's what separates the Paleozoic from Mesozoic, the Mesozoic from Cenozoic.
Any other questions?
You posited that humans and dinosaurs may have roamed the earth at the same time. What if the antediluvians were secretly working on human-dinosaur hybrids, or Nephilim in the Bible, and the flood was meant to wipe these abominations off the earth? And what if the fossils that we find are evidence of these experiments?
Yeah, that's actually pretty popular in evangelical theology circles regarding why God sent the flood, what was going on before the flood. But what's the best, what kind of answers can we give in regards to that? What does the evidence actually show, and what does the biblical evidence actually show?
Well, even before that time, the Bible distinguishes the descendants of Cain from the descendants of Seth, which was the lineage that led to Noah and so on. And I think these two groups of people were on the earth, and I think they were big. I think they were giants. I don't think the giants were any special group of people. I think the people were giants in those days. But some of them were descendants of Cain, who had rejected God, and some were descendants of Seth, who followed God. And they mixed together. So you had people that were from these different groups intermarrying, And God didn't like that because it was degrading the race that he had set aside to carry the truth of the gospel. So I think the Nephilim controversy is speculative and not something that I want to get into very deeply.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it says they married. Marriage is a human contract.
Right.
There was just this, intermingling where you had the righteous and the, not so righteous, and then the character of God seemed to have been lost sight of, and it just contributed to, as the Bible says, great wickedness and violence filled the earth. And it's fascinating. I actually did a study on it. The word for violence is speaking about social injustices. So part of the great crime before the flood, even though some, theologies out there will say, oh, it was because of these abominations, but part of the great crime before the flood was these vast social injustices, from murder and you name it, everything down the list of crimes that took place. It was everywhere, and there was violence, and so the flood was designed to check that violence.
Well, the Bible makes it very clear that you should not be yoked together with unbelievers. That comes right out of the Old Testament from the story of the Nephilim.
Fascinating. Any other questions? Right over there.
So, why do you think God created dinosaurs? What do you think their purpose would have been on this earth?
Yeah, that's a good question to speculate on, but they obviously encompassed the whole ecosystem. I mean, there were all these different forms that I just enumerated of different kinds of dinosaurs. Then there were the marine reptiles, the flying reptiles, all of these forms that went extinct at the Cretaceous boundary all seem to constitute like a whole nother world. And I kind of think, as we try to reconstruct what the world was like before the flood, I kind of think, why do we like to go to Disneyland? It's because you can go to Tomorrowland or Frontierland or you get to immerse yourself in a whole different environment. We like Disneyland. We like that at Disneyland because we were made to like that kind of experience. And I think the world before the flood must have been like that. So, oh, Daddy, we get to go to Dinosaur Land for vacation. There must have been a place on the earth where you could go and see these things, but they weren't everywhere. And I think they were just part of this great creation event in Genesis chapter 1.
Right, a world that was full of adventure and variety and
Exactly.
different kinds of environments for Adam to explore, right?
Yeah.
Perfect world at that time, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious why Noah didn't take some of the nice, peaceful dinosaurs with him when there's alligators and tigers and bears and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think Noah had much to say about it. If you read the account, the animals all came to the ark. They were led by angels, I assume. So they were the decision was made higher up. And yeah, maybe Noah would have liked to have taken some on there, and they just didn't show up. That's my guess. I can't say for sure there were no dinosaurs on the ark. I can just say that we don't have any evidence that they survived the flood.
In regards to the flood story, there's a lot of questions and debates on this. And obviously, I think the evidence, as basic as it is, shows us that there was a worldwide catastrophe. It seemed the animals were buried fast. It was a watery grave all over the world. And we know that in many different cultures, they all carry a similar worldwide flood story, right?
Yes.
The world at that time, as Noah was warning the world at that time, is it similar to our world today?
I think our behavior today would warrant God destroying us all. And thankfully, Jesus has rescued us from that destruction. But yeah, I think the world today is very much in the same state it was back then.
And during that time, God offered an ark of safety and deliverance for those that would accept it.
Yes.
I'm sure that seemed really insane to the people before the flood.
Oh, absolutely. Why would I get on that boat? Silly boat. It never rained here.
Right.
It's never rained before, and it's miles from any water.
Right. Do you see a parallel with when we present the message of Jesus to a dying world, that it seems sometimes foolish, sometimes seems ridiculous, unreasonable, but it's the very ark of safety God has provided?
It is, absolutely.
Dr. Chadwick, really appreciate the discussion. I've learned a lot. I want to take these dinosaur fossils with me, but I'm not going to. Could get arrested for it, but really appreciate the insight, learned a lot. I know our audience has learned a lot as well. So thank you for being here. The mysteries of dinosaurs often captivate our imaginations. These colossal creatures which roamed the earth long ago might seem to be relics of a bygone era, mere bones and fragments destined for museum displays. Yet they hold profound lessons about the power and creativity of God. Just as Job was pointed towards the behemoth to understand God's power and sovereignty, we too can look at these creatures to marvel at his capacity to create life in forms far beyond our understanding. And while even the mightiest dinosaurs have passed away, God's word and his promises endure forever. Dinosaurs remind me not to put my hope in finite things, but in the eternal God who never changes. Thanks for joining us, and may you always find hope.